Homelander felt it before anyone said his name. A familiar pressure crept back into the world, subtle, distant, but unmistakable. Systems hesitated again. Subs across the globe reported the same sensation they couldn't explain. Not fear, not pain, but the awareness of being noticed. Somewhere far beyond cameras and satellites, something old had returned. Homelander stood in a Vought briefing room smiling for screens when the memory hit him like a delayed impact. Not an image, not a sound, a certainty. Beerus had been here before, and more terrifying than that, he hadn't forgotten. Homelander's smile faltered. His heart raced for no reason his power could solve. Beerus hadn't appeared. No judgment had been spoken. But the silence felt deliberate now, intentional in a way that made his skin crawl. Because this wasn't a god arriving to test the world. This was a god returning to check his work. And Homelander suddenly understood something far worse than death. He wasn't being hunted. He was being remembered. And this time, the memory hadn't been closed. You're watching the moment fear turns inward. This story doesn't explode, it tightens. Subscribe once because what Beerus remembers next won't arrive loudly, and when the silence finally breaks, there won't be time to look away. Homelander had always trusted silence when it followed him. Silence meant fear. Silence meant anticipation. It was the space people left for something terrible they expected to happen. For most of his life, that silence had been his shadow, stretching ahead of him wherever he went, shaping rooms before he entered them. This silence was different. It didn't move out of his way. It didn't react. It didn't care that he was there. The first sign came during a routine Vought briefing. Screens glowed with familiar faces, analysts cycling through data feeds that had become increasingly sterile since Beerus' first appearance months ago. No speculation, no exaggerated projections, just facts. Cold, minimized, controlled. Homelander stood at the center of the room, hands clasped behind his back, posture perfect. He was still the most powerful being on the planet. Nothing about that had changed. Except how it felt. One of the screens flickered, not a malfunction, just a brief recalibration. A harmless thing. Homelander's eyes snapped toward it anyway, his pulse spiking before he could stop it. For a split second, the room felt heavier, like the air itself had tightened. No one else noticed. That terrified him. Ashley was talking, something about deployment optics and maintaining narrative consistency. Her voice washed over him, words blurring together. Homelander wasn't listening. He was remembering. The desert, the stillness. The way Beerus had looked through him, not at him, not dismissive, not impressed. Just finished. Homelander had spent months telling himself that moment didn't matter, that Beerus had left, that whatever cosmic audit had taken place was over. The world had stabilized, hadn't it? Vought still stood. He still flew. People still smiled when cameras rolled. But stabilization wasn't the same as safety. Because stabilization meant something had settled. His smile tightened as Ashley finished her sentence and looked to him for approval. The room waited. Homelander realized they were watching his face more than the screens now, measuring his reaction the way he once measured theirs. "Sounds good," he said automatically. The meeting ended without applause. Homelander left the tower and took to the air, rising fast, higher than necessary until the city shrank beneath him. The wind tore past his ears, a sensation that had always grounded him, reminded him of his superiority. It didn't help. He hovered above the clouds, scanning the horizon. Nothing, no glowing figure, no cosmic distortion, just the curve of the earth and the faint shimmer of atmosphere. "Get it together," he muttered. Then he felt it. Not a presence, not an energy signature, a continuity. The unmistakable sense that something had not reset when it left, that a thread he assumed was cut had merely been set aside. Beerus hadn't forgotten. The realization didn't come with panic. It came with clarity, and clarity hurt more. Homelander understood fear. He had inflicted it, studied it, lived inside it. Fear was loud. Fear begged for resolution. This wasn't fear. This was being cataloged. Back at Vought, internal metrics began to drift. Nothing dramatic. Response time slowed by fractions of a second. Approval chains looped unnecessarily. Algorithms flagged inconsistencies they couldn't resolve. Engineers blamed updates. Analysts blamed each other. Deep down, the system remembered something it wasn't designed to explain. Vought leadership noticed Homelander's behavior shift before anyone said Beerus' name out loud. He became sharper, more exacting. Public appearances stretched longer, rescues pushed harder, enemies dispatched with excessive precision. He wasn't showing dominance. He was proving relevance. Ashley confronted him after a televised intervention went off script. "You didn't need to level half the block," she said carefully. "The target was already contained." Homelander stared at her a beat too long. "I wanted to make sure." "Of what?" He smiled, wide and brittle. "That they remember." Ashley didn't ask who they were. The boys noticed it too. Butcher watched footage of Homelander's latest appearance, jaw clenched. "He's rattled." MM frowned. "By what? There's nothing new." "That's the problem," Butcher replied. "Whatever scared him ain't here." Huey felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Or it is, just not in a way we can see." Homelander began sleeping less, flying more, checking the sky between missions, between breaths. He caught himself listening for something that never came, a sound, a voice, a sign. Beerus offered none. That was the point. Somewhere beyond perception, Beerus observed the universe again, not because Homelander demanded attention, but because continuity had been disturbed. Loose ends bothered him the way asymmetry bothered an artist. Homelander existed in that category now, not as a threat, not as an enemy, as unresolved noise. Beerus didn't move toward Earth. He didn't need to. The memory was enough. Homelander stood alone one night in the Hall of Seven, staring up at statues carved in his image. For the first time, they looked smaller than he remembered, decorative, replaceable. His hands trembled slightly. "Don't forget me," he whispered to no one. The silence didn't answer, but it held. And somewhere in that silence, a god remained aware, patient, detached, and entirely unconcerned with whether Homelander noticed him back. Because remembering had never been about mercy. It had always been about keeping track. Silence stopped being empty once people began reacting to it. It didn't arrive as panic. Panic would have been easier to contain. What spread instead was hesitation, tiny, almost invisible delays that stacked on top of one another until the world's momentum felt off by a fraction no one could measure, but everyone felt. SUPs missed cues. Military response teams waited an extra beat before acting. News anchors stumbled over lines they delivered 100 times. Nothing broke, nothing exploded, but the rhythm was wrong. Homelander felt it everywhere. He flew lower now, closer to the city, scanning faces instead of skylines. He watched crowds during appearances, not for fear but for timing. The applause still came. The cheers still rose, yet they arrived a half-second late, as if people were checking something unseen before committing. That half-second carved into him. During a live rescue in Chicago, a collapsing overpass pinned a bus full of civilians. Homelander landed hard, concrete fracturing beneath his boots. Cameras caught the cape, the stance, the practiced stillness before action. He waited. The pause wasn't theatrical. It wasn't for effect. It was involuntary, an instinctive check for something that might interrupt him. Nothing did. He lifted the overpass with excessive force, flinging it aside so violently it shattered nearby vehicles. Screams followed. The crowd recoiled. the narrative slipped. Later in the air above Lake Michigan, Homelander realized what he'd done. Not the damage, the hesitation. Beerus hadn't appeared. And yet Homelander had acted like he might. Vought's internal channels lit up that night. Analysts flagged anomalies in Homelander's performance metrics, micro-delays, unnecessary overcorrections, aggression spikes with no tactical cause. Public relations labeled it overcommitment. Privately, they called it instability. Ashley convened an emergency session with senior executives. The room was sealed, phones confiscated, no recordings. "He's still effective," one executive insisted. "If anything, he's more decisive." Ashley swallowed. "He's reacting to something that isn't there." "Then we manage perception," another voice said. "That's our job." Someone finally said the name. Beerus. The room went quiet, not shocked, not alarmed, resigned. The first encounter had been categorized as an anomaly, a cosmic event that chose restraint. Vought's models assumed repetition would follow patterns. They were wrong. Beerus hadn't repeated anything. He had resumed. Homelander sensed it during a rehearsal for a national address. The teleprompter froze for a blink, then resumed. No error logged, no glitch detected, just a hiccup in continuity that felt personal. His jaw tightened, stopped the recording. The crew froze, cameras cut. "Is something wrong?" the director asked. Homelander turned slowly. "Do it again." They did. This time the words flowed perfectly. It didn't matter. He knew now that silence wasn't absence. It was a signal, one he couldn't decode, only endure. Across the city, the boys watched the address later that night. Butcher leaned forward, elbows on knees. "He's hunting ghosts." Shook his head. "Homelander doesn't hunt anything." "Used to," Butcher replied. "Now he's being hunted by the idea that he isn't the point anymore." Huey frowned. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Butcher said, eyes fixed on the screen, "that someone out there saw him once and didn't bother closing the file." That same night, several Vought subsidiaries quietly shut down experimental divisions. No press release, no explanation, just internal memos citing resource reallocation. Engineers were reassigned. Black budgets evaporated. A pattern emerged only if you knew what to look for. Beerus wasn't destroying assets. He was making them irrelevant. Homelander stood on the tower roof at dawn, cape snapping in the wind. He stared at the horizon, fists clenched, eyes burning, not with rage but with focus. "Look at me," he said aloud, voice carried away by the wind. No answer came. But something shifted. Not in the sky, not in the city, in him. For the first time, Homelander understood that Beerus remembering him didn't mean recognition. It meant pending resolution. And resolutions, when delayed long enough, didn't end gently. Far beyond Earth's orbit, Beerus rested, eyes half-lidded, attention divided between universes that behaved and one that didn't. He hadn't returned to punish. He'd returned to observe what happened when a mistake was left uncorrected. The noise was getting louder. Not because Beerus moved, because Homelander did. And with every frantic attempt to be seen, the signal grew clearer. Silence wasn't waiting anymore. It was counting. Being noticed had always been Homelander's oxygen. He felt it in the way crowds leaned forward when he descended, in the way cameras adjusted framing without being told, in the way silence bent around him before applause filled the gap. Attention wasn't optional to him, it was structural. Without it, the shape of the world felt wrong. Now attention came differently. It arrived sharp, uneven, inconsistent. After Chicago, Vought didn't pull him from the public eye. They doubled down. More appearances, more unscripted moments, More chances for Homelander to reassert control over the narrative that had begun slipping through his fingers. They called it confidence restoration. Homelander called it necessary. The first attempt was New York, a surprise appearance in Midtown during rush hour, framed as reassurance. No speech, no event, just Homelander landing between traffic lanes, smiling for the cameras, letting people feel him there. The crowd reacted. They always did. Phones came up, cheers followed, a few screams of excitement echoed between buildings. But the noise wasn't unified. Some people clapped late, some didn't clap at all. Some watched in silence, brows furrowed, as if waiting for a second act that never came. Homelander noticed every one of them. He hovered slightly lower than usual, close enough to hear individual voices. He looks tense. Why he stop? Is this part of it? Those words hit harder than bullets ever could. He smiled wider, lifted a hand. The crowd responded, but the rhythm was off again. A beat too slow, a half step behind, the kind of delay that suggested doubt, not fear. Homelander left without incident. That night, Vaught's internal sentiment trackers showed something alarming. Approval ratings hadn't dropped significantly. Engagement was stable, but variance had increased. Polarization where unity used to be. Homelander wasn't losing support. He was losing synchronization. Ashley stared at the data, jaw clenched. This isn't about popularity, it's about control. An analyst nodded. The audience isn't reacting to him anymore. They're assessing. Assessing what? The analyst hesitated. Whether he still matters. Vought escalated. They announced a global initiative, Homelander as a unifying symbol. Emergency deployments framed as spontaneous heroism. Carefully leaked footage of him intervening before disasters officially registered. The goal was saturation, overexposure as dominance. It backfired immediately. In Sao Paulo, Homelander stopped a building collapse caused by faulty construction. He caught the structure effortlessly, holding it aloft while rescue crews evacuated civilians. Cameras captured everything, including the moment Homelander glanced upward. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but viewers replayed it endlessly. What was he looking at? Did you see that pause? He didn't even look relieved. The narrative fractured. Conspiracy forums lit up, not with theories of weakness but of distraction. Something else was in the frame, just out of view. The boys followed the chatter quietly. He's not scared of dying, Huey said, scrolling through clips. He's scared of being evaluated. Butcher nodded. That's worse. You can fight fear of death. You can't fight fear of being irrelevant. Leaned back. You think Beerus is doing this on purpose? No, Butcher replied. That's the problem. He isn't doing anything. Homelander felt the shift most intensely when he was alone. In the tower, in silence, he replayed moments in his head. Every delay, every glance, every half second where he'd hesitated before acting. Not because he doubted himself, because he wondered if acting wrong would trigger something. Beerus hadn't spoken, hadn't appeared, hadn't acknowledged him in any way that mattered. And yet Homelander felt watched, not intensely, not threateningly, but the way a file sits open on a desk, unattended but not closed. He needed to force acknowledgement. Vought tried to stop him. When Homelander proposed a live global demonstration, a show of power without precedent, executives pushed back, carefully, politely. This isn't necessary, Ashley said. We don't need escalation. Homelander leaned forward. His voice was calm, too calm. I do. They scheduled it anyway. A controlled environment, a decommissioned offshore platform, no civilians, full media access. The idea was spectacle without risk. Homelander arrived on cue, hovering above the ocean as cameras rolled. He spoke briefly, unscripted. "I protect this world," he said, "and I always will." Then he acted. He struck the platform with a measured blast, not destructive enough to obliterate it, but powerful enough to register across sensors worldwide. Shockwaves rippled across the water. Steel warped. The display was undeniable. The response was immediate, but not how he expected. Instead of awe, the feeds filled with confusion. Analysts argued over energy readings that didn't align. Physicists questioned why the blast registered as less impactful than predicted. Social media latched onto one detail above all others. Homelander hadn't smiled. He'd been watching something no one else could see. Far beyond the cameras, far beyond Earth's immediate awareness, Beerus shifted slightly. Not out of alarm, not even interest. Irritation. Not at Homelander. At the noise. The universe had learned the wrong lesson. It was adapting around fear instead of correcting imbalance. Power was being flaunted where restraint had been expected. Beerus didn't move. But the file didn't close. Back on Earth, Homelander hovered above the ruined platform, chest rising and falling. He felt it then, the cost of being noticed when you didn't understand the criteria. Every attempt to be seen made him smaller. Every escalation made the silence heavier. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the rage and the need and the performance, Homelander understood something he'd never faced before. Being remembered wasn't the same as being chosen. And if Beerus ever decided to finish what he'd left incomplete, there would be no audience to save him. The ocean calmed, the cameras cut. Vought's stock dipped overnight. Not crashed, just corrected. The change didn't announce itself. There was no emergency broadcast, no press conference, no visible trigger anyone could point to and say, "This is when it started." That was the most unsettling part. The world didn't panic, it adjusted. Air traffic controllers began spacing flights farther apart without issuing new guidelines. Military patrols altered routes subtly, not because of orders, but because no one wanted to be responsible for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Satellites recalibrated automatically, drifting a fraction off optimal paths as if the algorithms themselves had grown cautious. The planet was acting careful. Homelander noticed it everywhere. In Lowe's Angels, a planned joint appearance with Maeve was quietly canceled. Official reason, logistical delays. Unofficial reality, no one wanted multiple top-tier sups in one location anymore. Not because of threats, because clustering felt unwise. Maeve confronted him backstage anyway. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked. Homelander didn't answer. He didn't need to. His jaw was tight, eyes unfocused, attention split between her and something far beyond the walls. Maeve swallowed. "Whatever this is, it's not about us." That sentence landed wrong. Homelander turned slowly. "Everything is about us." She held his gaze longer than most dared. Not anymore. She left before he could respond. Vought executives framed the global hesitation as post-event sensitivity, a market fluctuation, a temporary overcorrection, but internal memos told a different story. Risk models were failing. Predictive behavior charts no longer aligned with historical data. Fear was entering equations where it didn't belong. And fear had no clear source. Ashley stood in the war room, staring at a projection of global response heat maps. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "There's no single catalyst." An analyst spoke carefully. "There doesn't need to be. If enough decision makers believe something might happen, behavior changes cascade." Cascade toward what? The analyst hesitated. Toward minimizing notice. That word again. Notice. Vought issued new internal guidance. Keep Homelander visible but not central, dominant but not overwhelming, present but not provocative. It was the first time in Homelander's life he'd been told to take up less space. He ignored it. Instead, he flew. No destination, no mission, just movement, over cities, over oceans, over borders that meant nothing to him. He needed to feel the world respond the way it used to, fear snapping into place, attention locking on. But something was different now. People still looked up. They just didn't linger. Phones went away faster. Eyes slid back to screens. Conversations resumed. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't bravery. It was triage. Homelander hovered above Berlin longer than necessary, watching crowds flow beneath him like water around a stone. No screams, no cheers, just movement adapting to an obstacle. He clenched his fists. Somewhere in the city, a child tugged their parent's sleeve and pointed. The parent glanced up, nodded, and kept walking. Homelander descended hard enough to crack pavement. Heads turned then, but not with awe. With calculation. The boys watched footage of the incident in silence. "They're not scared of him," Huey said quietly. "They're scared of what reacting might cause." MM nodded, like animals going quiet when a predator nearby, but not running. Butcher lit a cigarette. He's not the apex anymore, he's the variable. Homelander returned to the tower furious, but the rage had nowhere to go. No enemy, no challenger, no god descending from the sky to validate his fear. Just absence, and the knowledge that Beerus hadn't forgotten. That memory pressed on him constantly now, not as threat, but as context. Everything Homelander did felt framed against a standard he didn't understand and couldn't influence. He tried restraint next. Public apologies, softer language, emphasizing protection over dominance. The performance felt wrong in his mouth, but Vought approved instantly. Media praised the evolution. Beerus didn't react. Nothing reacted. The world didn't relax. It didn't escalate. It simply continued its quiet correction, reducing exposure, smoothing edges, avoiding extremes. As if somewhere, deep in the structure of reality, a line had been crossed once, and no one wanted to cross it again. That night, Homelander stood alone on the tower balcony, staring into the sky. Not searching, waiting, for judgment, for recognition, for anything that confirmed he still mattered in the way that counted. He got none of it. Far beyond Earth, Beerus shifted again, not in anger, not in disappointment. In consideration. The universe was behaving carefully now, which meant it had learned something. But not enough, because adaptation without understanding didn't fix imbalance. It only delayed correction. And delays, Beerus knew, always made the final decision cleaner. On Earth, Homelander felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. For the first time, the world wasn't reacting to him. It was reacting around him. And that meant something far worse was being prepared. Vought called it phase redundancy. That name alone told you everything you needed to know about how scared they were. Phase redundancy wasn't a single plan. It was a layered stack of contingencies, overrides, and emergency frameworks designed to activate when the company could no longer agree on what the threat actually was. Not a response to danger, an admission that danger had outpaced understanding. The official briefing described it as future-proofing. Behind closed doors, it was something else entirely. Ashley stood at the head of the executive table, knuckles white around a tablet she hadn't looked at in minutes. The room was full. Defense consultants, behavioral analysts, ex-military strategists, risk assessors flown in at obscene cost. None of them spoke first, because no one wanted to be the person who said it out loud. Finally, one of the analysts cleared his throat. "We've run projections assuming Beerus reappears." Silence thickened, and the analyst swallowed. "None of our protocols reach phase 3. Ashley frowned. What does that mean? It means every model collapses before active engagement. The systems fail to trigger. The chain of command never completes. Another executive scoffed. That's not possible. Protocols don't just. They do when decision makers hesitate, the analyst said quietly. Our simulations assume rational escalation. Beerus doesn't escalate, he decides. That word again. Decides. Homelander wasn't in the room. That was intentional. Vought had learned the hard way that his presence skewed data. Meetings became performative. Truth bent around him. Still, his absence loomed. Fine, Ashley snapped. Then we pivot. What about containment? A military consultant shook his head. Containment requires cooperation or resistance. Beerus offers neither. Deterrence. Against what metric? Another asked. Pain, loss, threat. He doesn't register those the way we do. A pause. What about Homelander? Someone ventured. Publicly, he's still the strongest asset on Earth. The room stiffened. Ashley's voice dropped. We don't use Homelander as a solution anymore. We use him as insulation. No one argued. Because everyone had seen the footage. Homelander in Berlin. Homelander hovering too long. Homelander landing hard because he needed a reaction. The asset was destabilizing. Not weak, not defeated. Just misaligned. While Vought argued in circles, the world continued its quiet adjustment. Subs began refusing high-visibility missions, not out of rebellion but out of instinct. Street-level heroes took sick days. Corporate teams delayed launches. No one wanted to be the incident that coincided with something bigger. The boys noticed it on the ground. It's like the whole system's holding its breath, Huey said, watching live feeds from half a dozen cities. No one's saying it, but everyone's waiting. For what? MM asked. Butcher exhaled smoke. For permission or punishment. They didn't say Beerus's name. They didn't have to. Homelander felt the shift more acutely than anyone. His schedule thinned, appearances spaced out. Vought framed it as strategic packing, but he could feel the truth underneath. They were trying to make him smaller. He confronted Ashley in her office without knocking. You're sidelining me, he said. Ashley didn't look up immediately. When she did, her smile was thin and brittle. We're optimizing exposure. You're hiding me. We're protecting the brand. Homelander leaned closer. From who? The question hung there. Ashley chose her words carefully. From unpredictability. He laughed once, sharp, humorless. You think I'm unpredictable? She didn't answer. That was answer enough. Homelander left the tower enraged, but the rage burned differently now. It wasn't explosive. It was focused inward, grinding against a realization he refused to articulate. That Beerus hadn't needed to return to break him. He just needed to be remembered. Across the planet, small things started failing. Not catastrophically, not dramatically. A missile test aborted mid-sequence because a safeguard tripped with no logged cause. A power grid rerouted load unexpectedly, avoiding a blackout that hadn't yet been predicted. AI-driven systems adjusted parameters without instruction, erring on the side of minimal impact. Engineers called it noise. Physicists called it statistical drift. No one called it fear. But it was fear, baked into machines by the humans who built them. Late that night, something finally broke the pattern. A Vought black site facility in Nevada went dark. No explosion, no alarms broadcast, just silence. Satellite feeds showed the exterior intact. Security systems operational but unresponsive. Every signal inside the perimeter flattened to zero. Ashley received the report at 3:17 a.m. What do you mean no data? She demanded. I mean, the technician said, voice shaking, it's like the facility never existed. No thermal signature, No M output, no life signs. "Beerus," she whispered. The technician hesitated. "We don't know." That was worse. Homelander arrived at the site within minutes, ignoring orders. He hovered above the desert, scanning with every sense he had. Nothing. No heat, no sound, no resistance. Just absence carved cleanly into the landscape. For a moment, just a moment, he hoped Beerus would appear, that there would be acknowledgement, anger, anything. Instead, the night remained still. Homelander descended slowly, boots crunching sand at the edge of the perimeter. He stepped forward and stopped. The ground ahead wasn't scorched. It was resolved, as if reality itself had decided that everything beyond that line was unnecessary. Homelander took an involuntary step back. Far away, beyond space and scale, Beerus opened one eye. Not because he'd acted, but because the universe had. And it was learning the wrong lesson again. The Nevada site was never acknowledged publicly. By sunrise, Vought had buried it under 3 layers of denial: a temporary systems outage, a classified training relocation, and a conveniently timed NDA sweep that silenced anyone who had ever drawn a paycheck connected to the facility. Trucks arrived before dawn. Drones followed. By noon, the desert looked unchanged. Except it was. The ground didn't just lack footprints, it resisted them. Survey teams reported subtle inconsistencies, instruments slipping off calibration as if the terrain refused to be measured. One geologist described it as finished, then apologized, and said he didn't know why that word came to mind. Vought ordered him reassigned. Homelander didn't leave. He stood at the edge of the perimeter long after the sun rose, long after technicians pretended the problem was solved. He hovered inches above the sand, eyes narrowed, senses pushed outward to the point of strain. Still nothing. No echo, no residue, no signature he could chase or confront. The absence wasn't empty, it was complete. That was the cost of being noticed. Not destroyed, not attacked. Edited. Back in New York, Vaught's internal communications fractured. Executives spoke in half sentences. Analysts flagged projections without proposing actions. Every department waited for someone else to move first because no one wanted to own the next mistake. Ashley convened another emergency session. "We need a visible show of control," she said, voice tight. "If we don't fill the silence, the market will." A consultant nodded. "A major event, reassert dominance." "Where?" someone asked. No one answered immediately. The obvious answer, New York, hung unspoken. And everyone felt the weight of it. Homelander was summoned anyway. This time he arrived composed, too composed. His posture was perfect, smile calibrated, voice smooth when he spoke. "You want a demonstration," he said, "not a question." Ashley nodded, a reminder that we're still the center. Homelander glanced at the city skyline through the glass wall. Centers don't remind people they exist, they pull. No one challenged him. The plan moved forward. A live broadcast, a controlled incident, a rescue engineered to showcase precision, restraint, and overwhelming power. Vought had done this hundreds of times before. The difference now was that every detail had been triple-checked, not for safety, but for attention. Because attention felt dangerous. The boys learned about the event from a leaked briefing. "They're baiting something," MM said. "But not Beerus," Huey replied. "They're baiting the world, trying to see if it reacts." Butcher ground out his cigarette. "That's worse." The event unfolded in Times Square. Crowds gathered, cameras rolled. The scenario played out flawlessly until it didn't. Homelander descended in a burst of wind and light, catching a collapsing structure mid-fall, saving dozens in a single fluid motion. The crowd cheered on cue. Applause surged. For a heartbeat, it felt like before. Then the cheering thinned. Not stopped, thinned. People clapped while glancing at the sky. Phones stayed half lowered. Eyes tracked the empty space above Homelander longer than they watched him. Homelander noticed. He finished the performance, delivered the lines, smiled for the cameras. But the applause never peaked. It plateaued, uncertain. The broadcast ratings were high. Engagement metrics were muted. Vought spun it as audience fatigue. Homelander felt something else. That night he patrolled aggressively, faster, louder. He intervened where he wasn't needed, hovered longer than necessary, made sure people looked. And they did. But the looking had changed. Fear was no longer clean. It was mixed with calculation, with restraint, with an unspoken hope that nothing else would notice. In a quiet apartment miles away, Huey watched the footage replay. "He's trying too hard," he said. Butcher nodded. "That's how you know he's already lost." The next incident happened without cameras. A minor soup gang clash in Chicago, normally beneath Homelander's attention, ended abruptly when the entire block lost power. Witnesses reported a pressure drop, a momentary distortion like heat haze in winter air. No explosion, no crater. Just 6 subs unconscious, their abilities gone cold, unresponsive. By the time authorities arrived, the effect had already faded. Vought couldn't claim it. Homelander hadn't been there. No one knew who had. Ashley received the report and felt her stomach drop. "Correlation?" she asked. The analyst shook his head. "We can't establish one." "Causation?" A pause. "We can't rule it out." That was becoming a pattern. Homelander felt it too, a sense that every attempt to reassert himself made something else shift, not toward him, around him, as if the universe itself was adjusting margins, narrowing tolerance. He flew higher that night, past clouds, past controlled airspace, into the thin quiet where the world curved away. He shouted once, a raw, furious sound torn from his chest. Nothing answered. Far beyond perception, Beerus sat with eyes half-lidded, fingers drumming idly against a stone that predated stars. He wasn't watching Homelander. He was watching the systems. The corrections, the hesitations, the way fear had infected decision-making, turning a flawed equilibrium into something brittle. This universe had learned to be careful. But careful wasn't stable. Careful accumulated pressure. And pressure, when released, always sought the simplest resolution. Beerus exhaled. Somewhere, a law of probability bent slightly out of shape. Back on Earth, Homelander felt it as a sudden vertigo, a lurch without movement, like standing on ground that had decided to tilt. He steadied himself, heart racing. For the first time, he understood something with terrifying clarity. Being noticed by a god was the danger. Being adjusted for was. And whatever came next wouldn't announce itself. It would just finish. The first thing that vanished was coordination. It didn't happen all at once, and it didn't look dramatic enough to trigger alarms. Meetings still happened. Orders were still given. Messages were still sent. But decisions no longer aligned. Teams executed plans that no longer supported each other, like a body whose nerves fired half a second too late. Vought noticed it in the margins. A weapons rollout approved by legal was quietly stalled by procurement. A media response drafted overnight was never deployed because no one wanted to be the one who pushed publish. Entire departments began defaulting to delay, not because they were instructed to, but because hesitation felt safer than action. Silence had become a signal. Homelander sensed it before the numbers confirmed it. He felt it in the way handlers spoke more carefully around him, in the way crowds reacted a fraction slower, as if waiting to see whether reacting was still wise. He stopped doing interviews. He didn't announce the change. He simply withdrew, Patrols became irregular, appearances untelevised. The symbol that once demanded constant visibility now hovered on the edge of absence, unsure whether presence still meant dominance or invitation. Ashley called it a strategic cooldown. No one believed her. The boys watched the pattern form from a distance. "He's not pulling back," MM said, eyes fixed on the data wall. "He's circling." "But not hunting," Huey replied. "He's listening." Butcher exhaled slowly. "He's waiting for permission." The idea sat wrong in the room. Homelander didn't wait, he took. He asserted. He crushed resistance before it could become thought. Yet now, he was holding still, like an animal that had sensed a larger shadow crossing its territory. The next sign came from overseas. A Vought-managed black site in Eastern Europe went dark for 7 minutes. No alarms, no distress call. Power didn't fail, it was deliberately shut down, then restored. When contact resumed, the site reported no breach, no intruder, no casualties. Except every enhanced subject housed, there had lost access to their abilities for exactly those 7 minutes. Not suppressed, not blocked. Unavailable. Doctors ran tests. Neurological pathways were intact, compound V markers unchanged. It was as if something had simply stepped between cause and effect. Vought classified the incident at the highest level. Homelander read the report twice, then a third time. Then he crushed the tablet in his hand. This wasn't erasure. This was rehearsal. The boys got the leak anyway. "This is him," Huey said quietly. "Not attacking, not warning, just checking the wiring." Butcher shook his head. "Nah, that's worse. That's someone making sure the lights still work before they shut them off." Publicly, the world felt normal. Crime rates dipped. SUPs hesitated. Governments stalled major initiatives. Nothing was wrong enough to justify panic. But the silence between events stretched. And stretched. Until it started to feel intentional. Homelander finally broke it. He appeared unannounced above the Atlantic, hovering just outside controlled airspace, eyes fixed on nothing. No cameras, no audience, just sky, water, and the slow curve of the planet. He didn't shout this time. He spoke. Not loudly, not angrily. "Are we done?" he asked the empty air. The words vanished into wind. No answer came. But something shifted. Thousands of miles away, probability models used by 3 separate governments recalculated simultaneously. Trade algorithms flagged anomalies they couldn't define. A satellite altered its orbit by a fraction of a degree to compensate for a phantom variance that no longer existed by the time engineers checked the logs. Beerus opened one eye. He didn't look at Earth. He looked past it. Silence, once established, was useful. It revealed who moved without prompting, who acted out of habit, and who froze without instruction. This universe had chosen hesitation. That made the next step simpler. On Earth, Homelander felt it again, that subtle vertigo, stronger this time. His breath hitched. For a moment, the sky felt too close, like it might fold inward. He descended hard, landing in the middle of an empty field outside the city. The impact left a shallow crater, but no one was there to see it. For the first time since he could remember, he wasn't sure where to go next. Vought's board convened in emergency session. Not because of a disaster. Because nothing was happening, and it was destroying them. "We need action," one executive insisted. "Visibility, control." "Control of what?" another snapped. "We don't even know the parameters anymore." Ashley listened, pale, hands clenched. Finally, she spoke. What if the mistake was trying to fill the silence? The room went still. No one liked the implication. That doing nothing might be safer than doing something. That power, once exposed as conditional, couldn't simply be reasserted. The meeting ended without resolution. That night, Homelander dreamed, not of Beerus, of being watched without being seen. He woke furious, heart racing, and flew, fast, erratic, reckless, over cities that no longer looked up in awe, only in wary acknowledgement. Then the real escalation hit. A Vought-controlled satellite network blinked offline for 12 seconds. When it came back, one file had been altered. A simple internal classification change. Beerus' designation was no longer listed as unknown threat. It had been updated to system-level correction event. No author, no timestamp. Just the change. Ashley stared at the screen, breath shallow. Because that wasn't a warning. That was documentation. And documentation meant the process was already underway. Far above reality's familiar layers, Beerus rose to his feet. Not to strike. To conclude. On Earth, Homelander felt something snap, not in the world but in himself. The last illusion that this was a contest, a confrontation, a waiting game. This wasn't about him. It never had been. And the universe had just acknowledged that fact in writing. The adjustment did not come with screams or sirens. It arrived as paperwork. Across Vought's global infrastructure, minor classifications were quietly revised, threat assessments downgraded or reworded, emergency response protocols amended with vague language like non-applicable scenario and external causality. No one announced the changes. No press release followed. Yet thousands of employees felt the shift immediately, like gravity had tilted half a degree, and no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Subs noticed it next. Their handlers stopped pushing them toward escalation. Patrol routes shortened. Live fire exercises postponed indefinitely. When someone asked why, the answer was always the same: stand by. The phrase spread like a virus, infecting conversations that used to revolve around dominance and control. Homelander watched this happen from the sky. He hovered above a city that no longer panicked when he arrived. People still looked up, still recorded, still whispered his name, but the fear had changed shape. It was no longer directed at him. It was wider, unfocused, as if they were bracing for something that might arrive regardless of who stood in front of it. That terrified him more than defiance ever could. He landed hard on the roof of Vought Tower, strode through security without acknowledgement, and pushed into the executive floor unannounced. Ashley flinched when she saw him, then forced herself to stand straight. "Why are they slowing down?" he demanded. "Why is everyone waiting?" Ashley swallowed. Because nothing you do changes what's happening." The room froze. Homelander stared at her, waiting for the usual backpedal. It didn't come. She looked terrified, yes, but not deferential, more like someone admitting a terminal diagnosis. "You're still powerful," she added quickly. "That hasn't changed, it's just the context has." Homelander laughed, too loudly, too fast. "Context," he repeated. "I am the context." But even as he said it, he felt how thin the words sounded. The boys tracked the same pattern from the opposite end of the spectrum. "Crime's down," Huey said, scrolling through reports. "Not because people are safer, because they are hesitating." "Sups too," added. "They're pulling punches, avoiding situations, like they're afraid of triggering something." Butcher leaned back, jaw tight. This is what happens when the apex predator stops hunting. Everything else forgets how to move. Kimiko tilted her head, uneasy. She didn't sign, she didn't need to. The silence said enough. The world wasn't healing. It was holding its breath. Governments reacted next. Joint task forces were quietly dissolved, not disbanded, paused. Military satellites adjusted targeting protocols to exclude certain predictive variables that no longer made sense. Think tanks issued confidential memos warning against provocative displays of force without defined adversaries. One analyst put it bluntly before being reassigned. You don't posture at weather. Homelander tried to reclaim control the only way he knew how. He staged a rescue. A live-streamed intervention, high visibility, maximum spectacle, a burning high-rise, hostages, a villain with just enough power to look impressive. It should have been perfect. He arrived on cue, stopped the collapse, neutralized the threat in seconds. And the crowd applauded. They didn't cheer. They applauded. Polite, appreciative, like an audience acknowledging a performance they'd already expected to end well. Homelander stood there, cape fluttering, heart pounding, and realized with horror that no one was afraid of what he might do next. They were already thinking past him. That night the dreams returned. This time there was no watching presence, no pressure, just absence, a vast, indifferent quiet that made his own thoughts echo too loudly. He woke screaming. Vought's internal models finally broke. Not catastrophically, not in a way that justified alarms. They simply stopped converging. Predictions diverged wildly, each scenario incompatible with the next. Probability curves flattened. Outcome forecasting became meaningless. A senior analyst resigned on the spot. "There's no antagonist," she told her supervisor. "There's no arc. This isn't a crisis, it's a correction." Her access was revoked before she reached the elevator. Beerus observed none of this directly. He didn't need to. From his vantage beyond urgency, the changes were obvious. Systems adapting around an absence. Life recalibrating to the realization that escalation was no longer rewarded. The universe had learned something dangerous. That survival did not require winning, only avoiding notice. That realization, once internalized, could not be undone. Homelander felt himself shrinking, not physically, but narratively. Every attempt to reassert relevance only highlighted how unnecessary he'd become to the larger pattern. He confronted Butcher once, out of desperation. Not violently, not theatrically. "You know," Homelander said, hovering just out of reach, "this ends when I say it ends." Butcher looked at him, genuinely tired. "No, it ended when you stopped mattering." Homelander almost killed him. Almost. But the moment passed. The impulse evaporated, replaced by the sick certainty that violence now felt optional, unnecessary, worse, irrelevant. That was when the final adjustment began. Across multiple secure networks, a new directive propagated without origin. Not an order. A principle. Avoid escalation events above local significance. No signature, no authority. Just adoption. By morning, it had been implemented everywhere. The world had decided, collectively and without discussion, that drawing attention upward was the worst possible mistake. Homelander stood alone on a rooftop, watching the city move without him. Far beyond perception, Beerus exhaled slowly. The universe had adjusted. Now came the consequence of that adjustment. Because systems that learn to avoid gods rarely survive the moment, a god decides to conclude the lesson. And that moment was no longer theoretical. Avoidance worked until it didn't. For a brief stretch of time, the world convinced itself that restraint was stability. News cycles flattened. Subs kept their heads down. Governments framed inaction as prudence. Vought rebranded hesitation as responsibility. The language softened, the edges dulled, and people told themselves this was what recovery looked like. But avoidance is not balance. It is delay. The first failure wasn't violent, it was administrative. A regional power grid in South America shut down for 11 minutes during a routine load redistribution. Engineers followed protocol, rerouted power, stabilized output. When systems came back online, no damage was reported, no sabotage detected. Yet the event repeated 3 days later, then again the week after, each time in a different country, each time during a different benign operation. The pattern wasn't disruption. It was proximity. Each incident occurred during moments of human decision-making, votes, authorizations, approvals, moments where escalation could have occurred but didn't, as if reality itself was checking whether restraint was intentional or accidental. The boys noticed the timing before anyone else. "This isn't random," Huey said, staring at the spread. "It's like stress testing." "But not for infrastructure," MM replied. "For us." Butcher said nothing. He didn't need to. He knew the difference between someone watching a system and someone waiting for it to fail on its own. Homelander was unraveling faster. Avoidance had stripped him of enemies, but it had also stripped him of purpose. Every day without escalation felt like being erased by inches. He tried appearances again, speeches, controlled aggression. It didn't matter. The world responded with calm compliance, not fear. That was worse. Fear acknowledged relevance, calm did not. He began demanding briefings no one could give him, demanding targets that no longer existed. When told there were no active threats, he snapped, not explosively but inwardly. The rage had nowhere to land. Vought executives whispered behind glass walls. "He's destabilizing," one said. "He always was," another replied. "We just didn't notice when the world revolved around him." The turning point came quietly. A mid-level Vought facility in Nevada was ordered to shut down indefinitely. Not evacuated, not destroyed, just closed. The directive came from no department, bore no signature, and cited no incident. Ashley stared at the order, hands shaking. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "There's no trigger." The analyst beside her didn't look up from his screen. "There doesn't need to be. The system flagged it as unnecessary." Unnecessary to what? He hesitated, then answered honestly. To continuation. That night, Homelander flew without destination. Not patrolling, not searching. Just moving. He broke the sound barrier 3 times without realizing it. The air fractured behind him, but no one scrambled jets. No one issued warnings. The sky absorbed the violence like it had learned not to react. He stopped above the ocean again, the same place as before. "Enough," he whispered. The word vanished. Then finally, something answered. Not with a voice, with subtraction. A distant city lost its enhanced population in a single moment. No explosion, no light, just absence. Subs collapsed mid-step, mid-flight, mid-performance, alive but ordinary. Compound V signatures evaporated as if they had never bonded in the first place. Hospitals flooded, cameras rolled, panic spread. Beerus had not arrived. He had adjusted a variable. The world froze. Governments scrambled to explain what couldn't be explained. Vought went into full damage control, but the narrative shattered immediately. Power had not been taken by an enemy. It had been revoked. Homelander felt it instantly. Not in his body, in his identity. For the first time, he considered, truly considered, the possibility that his power was conditional, that it existed at the pleasure of something that had never asked permission to grant it. He screamed. The sound cracked the clouds, shattered windows along the coast. And still no response. The boys watched the footage in silence. "He did that," Huey said. "No," Butcher replied. "He caused it." The distinction mattered. Beerus did not punish escalation. He punished the assumption that escalation mattered at all. The world had learned to avoid gods. Now it was learning that avoidance was still a form of attention. And attention invited review. Far beyond perception, Beerus stood. Not because he was angry. Because the test was complete. Avoidance had failed. Not because the universe escalated, but because it mistook restraint for understanding. He raised one claw, not toward Earth, but toward the framework that allowed it to believe in permanence. Back on the planet, Homelander hovered over a city that no longer trusted him, no longer feared him, and now might not even need him. His breathing grew erratic. "This isn't fair," he muttered to no one. The irony was lost on him. Fairness had never been a parameter. The sky darkened, not with clouds, but with the sense of something aligning. A pressure that no shelter addressed. A certainty that delay had ended. The age of avoidance was over. And whatever came next would not ask whether the world was ready. It would simply proceed. The world did not collapse when it was noticed. That was the first mistake everyone made. There were no continents splitting apart, no oceans boiling, no divine announcement tearing across the sky. Life continued in familiar rhythms. Traffic lights changed, broadcasts aired, people went to work. Yet everything moved with a new, subtle stiffness, like a body adjusting after realizing the painkillers had worn off. Being noticed did not mean destruction. It meant evaluation. The subs felt it most clearly, not as fear but as friction. Power still worked, but not as cleanly. Flight took more effort. Strength no longer felt infinite. Abilities that once answered instinctively now hesitated, as if waiting for confirmation that they were still permitted to exist. Homelander hovered above Vought Tower, hands clenched, jaw tight. He was still powerful. Nothing had been taken from him. And yet, something fundamental had changed. The certainty that his strength was absolute had cracked, replaced by the awareness that it could be contextual. That awareness gnawed at him. Vought executives scrambled to reassert order, but the language had shifted beneath their feet. Press releases spoke of unexpected anomalies and temporary recalibrations. Investors asked questions no one could answer. Entire marketing strategies collapsed overnight when audiences stopped responding to fear-based messaging. Fear no longer sold, because fear implied a threat you could name. This wasn't that. Ashley watched the numbers fall and realized something terrifying. The brand wasn't damaged by scandal or exposure. It was being rendered irrelevant by the absence of escalation. No villains, no wars, no disasters that required heroes. The product had lost its market. The boys operated differently now. They didn't hunt, they monitored. "We can't fight this," Huey said, voice low. "There's no angle." Butcher nodded reluctantly. "And that's the worst part. For once, the world's not broken in a way you can punch." Kimiko stared at a muted screen showing a former soup struggling to lift a car. Not failing, just struggling. Human effort creeping back into something that had once been effortless. MM exhaled slowly. This is what happens when power finds out it's on loan. Homelander refused to accept that. He staged another appearance, bigger, louder. He stopped a collapsing bridge with one hand, snarled at the cameras, dared the world to react. They did. By applauding. Again. Not cheering, not screaming. Just acknowledgement. Like a performance meeting expectations. That broke something in him. He lashed out not at people but at symbols. Billboards, Vought signage, empty buildings, displays of dominance that hurt no one and proved nothing. Still nothing answered. Then the cost became visible. A second wave of revocations hit, not total, not random, selective. Entire categories of abilities faded across the globe. Regeneration weakened, enhanced perception dulled, durability normalized. No deaths, no mercy. Just correction. Doctors couldn't explain it, scientists couldn't model it, Vought couldn't spin it. Beerus had not destroyed power. He had edited it. And edits implied ownership. Homelander finally understood. This wasn't punishment for defiance. It was consequence for assumption. For believing that being strong meant being important. He stood alone in a soundstage. the same place where his myth had been manufactured, staring at a mirror that reflected power without meaning. For the first time, he whispered something dangerously close to truth. "Please." The word echoed back at him, empty. Far beyond Earth's perception, Beerus observed the results with mild interest. Not satisfaction, not disappointment. Confirmation. The universe had been noticed. It had responded by reshaping itself around the fear of that notice. Now it was learning the final lesson, that being seen by a god does not guarantee significance. It only guarantees scrutiny. The pressure increased not as force but as inevitability. Systems aligned toward conclusions no one could influence. Choices narrowed. Outcomes converged. This was the cost. Not destruction, but the slow, undeniable realization that nothing here was central enough to demand preservation. On Earth, Homelander knelt, not in surrender but in exhaustion. His cape pooled around him like a discarded flag. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of continuing. Because continuation required relevance. And relevance was no longer his to claim. The sky above him remained clear, which was worse than thunder, because clarity meant the decision hadn't been made yet. And whatever decision came next would not be negotiated. It would simply arrive. Verdicts were supposed to sound like something. A gavel strike, a sentence spoken aloud, a declaration that made the outcome undeniable. Humanity had built its understanding of judgment around noise, ceremony, and finality. This one came without any of that. There was no announcement when the pressure changed again. No tremor, no flash, no sign in the sky. The world simply reached a point where certain paths stopped existing, not blocked, not destroyed, just unavailable. Vought discovered it first. Entire contingency protocols failed to load. Emergency escalation trees returned blank results. Automated responses designed to activate during catastrophic scenarios no longer triggered, not because of malfunction, but because the conditions they were meant to respond to no longer resolved as valid threats. Ashley stared at the screen, her voice barely audible. It's like the system doesn't recognize us anymore. No one contradicted her. Homelander felt it in his body this time, not as weakness but as limitation. He could still fly, still lift, still kill, but every action felt detached from consequence, like swinging a fist underwater. The impact was there, but the meaning was gone. He tested it. A controlled show of force in an abandoned industrial zone. Concrete shattered, steel twisted. The spectacle was undeniable. And yet the world didn't react. No scramble, no panic, no response teams racing to intercept. The event registered, logged, and dissolved into the background noise of a planet that had learned not to escalate. Homelander screamed into the empty air, demanding acknowledgement. The air gave him nothing. The boys watched from a distance, understanding settling in like cold. "This isn't restraint anymore," Huey said. "This is exclusion." Butcher nodded grimly. "He's not being punished, he's being written out." Kimiko's hands trembled. She signed slowly, deliberately, like a story that stops mentioning a character. That was when the final shift occurred. Across the globe, subs experienced a quiet convergence. Not a loss of power, not a surge, just alignment. Their abilities stabilized at levels that no longer allowed large-scale disruption, enough to survive, enough to exist, not enough to dominate. Beerus had not destroyed the system. He had normalized it. Far beyond the planet's frantic calculations, Beerus stood motionless. He did not look down with anger or judgment. He looked with the disinterest of a craftsman reviewing a finished adjustment. The universe no longer spiked unpredictably, no longer demanded correction. It had learned to stay beneath thresholds that invited attention. That was the verdict. No words were necessary. Homelander understood it in fragments. He tried to reach Vought, they didn't answer. He tried to reach the public, they responded with polite distance. He tried to reach Fear. Fear did not answer back. In a moment that would have once shaken the world, Homelander landed in the center of Times Square and did nothing. No speech, no threat, just stood there, waiting for reality to acknowledge him. People walked around him, carefully, respectfully, indifferently. The symbol that once defined power now felt like an artifact. Dangerous, yes, but no longer central to how the world functioned. Homelander laughed, then choked on the sound. "This isn't how it ends," he muttered. He was right. It didn't end. It concluded. The difference mattered. Beerus turned away, not in dismissal but in completion. There was nothing left to adjust here. The system had stabilized. The lesson had been absorbed. Whether anyone understood it was irrelevant. The universe did not exist to be understood, only to function. On Earth, Homelander stood alone, the weight of silence pressing in from all sides. He was alive, he was powerful, and he had never been smaller. Somewhere beyond reach, the presence that had reshaped everything withdrew, not dramatically, not ceremoniously. Simply no longer needed. The verdict had been delivered, and there would be no appeal. Nothing marked the moment Beerus left. No rupture in the sky, no cosmic recoil, no sensation of relief or loss. The pressure that had defined the past weeks didn't lift. It simply ceased to be relevant, like a rule that no longer needed enforcing because everyone had already adjusted to it. The universe continued. That was the most unsettling part. Vought International collapsed without ever announcing its fall. There was no single scandal, no raid, no dramatic exposure. Funding dried up first, then partnerships quietly dissolved. Executives resigned for personal reasons. Entire divisions shuttered overnight, their work deemed unnecessary in a world where escalation no longer sold. Ashley watched the final internal dashboard go dark and realized there was nothing left to manage. Not because they had failed, but because the system they had built no longer had a role to play. Power without narrative had no market. Subs adapted or disappeared. Some retired voluntarily, relieved by the shrinking of expectations. Others clung to relevance, only to find that the world had moved on without them. Crimes dropped, not to zero, but to human scale. Damage became survivable. Fear lost its currency. The boys disbanded slowly. There was no victory to celebrate, no enemy left to hunt. Returned to his family. Frenchie and Kimiko left the city behind. Huey took a job that didn't involve watching the world burn. Butcher stayed the longest, standing at the edge of it all, furious at the absence of something to fight. In the end, even he had to admit the truth he hated most. The war didn't end. It became unnecessary. Homelander survived. That fact alone felt like punishment. He still flew, still trained, still watched the world from above, but no one waited for him to arrive anymore. Disasters resolved without spectacle. Fear didn't precede him. Cameras no longer tracked the sky. He wasn't dethroned. He was bypassed. Sometimes people looked up at him, not with terror, not with awe, but with uncertainty, like they were trying to remember why he had ever mattered this much. That uncertainty hollowed him out. He never learned where Beerus went, never heard a final word. And that was the true ending. Because the God who had altered everything hadn't left behind a scar or a warning. He had left behind a condition. A universe that understood instinctively that attention from something greater was not a reward, it was a risk. And so it learned to live smaller, quieter, more carefully. Far beyond Earth's diminished dramas, Beerus rested, not thinking about the planet, not remembering its names or faces. It had passed review. Nothing more was required. The universe, once desperate to be noticed, had learned the value of being overlooked. And Homelander, alive, powerful, irrelevant, stood as the final reminder of what happens when power mistakes visibility for worth. The god did not return. He did not need to. The world he left behind would never forget the silence, and it would never invite it back again.